Welcome everybody to the first in the new year of our environmental humanities lectures, and it's wonderful to see such a combination of old friends and new students. So good to see you. And the way it works is that we have a guest speaker giving a talk, followed by questions and discussion, and then we break and wander over to the middles of the wine and continue our intellectually rigorous interrogations. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Tim Dean today, an old friend, a long-term friend of our MA in creative writing, I suppose with a slightly different professional hat on. Tim is a highly distinguished radio producer for the BBC, who, in common with David Attenborough, has forsworn an illustrious management career in order to remain a programme maker, and has for 30 years been making arts programmes and natural history programmes for the BBC, but more recently has emerged as one of our leading nature writers, as part, I suppose, of this extraordinary new wave of nature writing that is still, I think, surging through British culture. It hasn't yet broken. And at the same time, I think Tim has been one of the major theorists of this surprising cultural development. And a theorist, I think, of an enthusiastic but also sceptical kind. He wrote in 2013 that a roll call of the population crashes and extinctions among wildlife would say it all. But pressing losses in the last few years have sent us back to study and write tellingly of what we have to remember, what we once saw, to attend with a deathbed diligence to what is going, and to do this above all in the first person singular. If they were dependent on facts alone, these books of new nature writing would fail. Their strengths and authenticity come from their subjective eye. And Tim's work certainly exemplifies this. But not only this, because it also brings to bear other fine qualities, especially scientific precision, diligent research, a deep understanding of both local and large-scale ecological processes. And I think that the more personal memoir, one of those first natural history memoirs, The Running Sky, which I think came out in 2010? In 2009. The story of his love of birdwatching, his lifelong love of birdwatching. That is a wonderful book. But I suppose particularly formally innovative is the book called Four Fields, which came out in 2013. Got that right. A book which combines, in terms of ecological perspective, the global and the local, I think, in an unprecedented way. As I suppose the clue is in the title, it takes four fields in different parts of the world. One in Cambridgeshire, one in Zambia, the field where the Battle of Little Bighorn was fought in Montana, and the surroundings of the Chernobyl disaster in the Ukraine. It takes these, it studies each of them ecologically, in terms of what is happening to it now, and also culturally, in terms of the cultural meaning, the evolving cultural meaning that each of these places have. And so I can't think of anyone better to invite to talk about the kind of work his own work, but the kind of work that we aspire to do in the Environmental Humanities Research Centre, the bringing together of ecological and cultural and global and local perspectives. So here's Tim D.
I'd be very happy to die now. It might be better for all of us, actually. That's very sweet. Thank you very much for everything you just said. Thank you all for coming. This is a slightly more provisional talk than perhaps it might be in a few months' time. It's about a book that I'm still actually writing, or even barely have begun to write. But it's my next book. I begin and end in a hospital, as it happens. I was due to come to talk to you, I think, in November or early December last year, and I was ill. That's some of the stuff I was putting down my throat at that time. And we'll get to another hospital at the end. Anyway, I wanted to talk about something, having spent time, particularly in a placeless place so much of last year, 6 months or so, in and out of hospitals, and in a seasonless place, as a hospital is, as indeed most of us spend lots of our time in buildings of seasonlessness. I wanted to talk about trying to write a season, and that's just explicitly what I'm up to at the moment. And hold in our minds this, my big thought at the beginning, which is that first you're a child and then you're 50, and it happens incredibly fast. So beginnings and endings have become something that I'm interested in writing about, and I'm working on a book about the spring, which is really actually about the passing of time and the sharing of time. Spring in the Northern Hemisphere, where we are, arrives and moves north through Europe from the Mediterranean to the northern Cape of Norway at roughly 3.5 to 4 miles an hour. That's walking speed for some of us, and it takes roughly 6 months. It's about 3,500 miles, and I think if you did 20 miles a day, you could do it in 175 days. It's pretty much the same temperature in northern Norway in midsummer in late June as it is in northern Morocco in late December. And if the season moves at walking pace, it ought to be possible to walk with it, that's my thinking, to walk the European spring for half of the year. So I've tried to do that both literally and imaginatively, to keep pace with the season, to keep in step with it for what is me the best season of them all, and to ride this spring green wave northwards, and to do this whilst thinking what spring has meant to others and might still mean to us, and how it has been told and how it still tells. Why does the necessary business of putting forth leaves and the singing of assertive songs move us so much? Why did it? Why does it? It all springs, if you pardon the pun, from the tilt of the earth, of course, a wrongness of sorts, a happy accident or errancy that makes green life possible for only part of the year at the top and the bottom of our globe. Our planet's angle relative to the fall of light from the sun makes the seasons. If we were square on to our star, we'd all be living in the awful seasonless tropics, like the sweating cummerbund swaddling the equator, where the light comes evenly and always, where day length and temperature barely alters through the year. The tilted globe gives us winter, where the sun struggles to strike the north and life must leave until light, warmth and greenness are possible once more. The possible reoccupation of our latitudes is what the spring means. I spent some of this last spring, 2017, in Denmark, talking, amongst other people, to a man called Felix Rieder, who works on the Hamburgian people, who were the first human people to reoccupy or occupy present-day Denmark after the last ice age. 15,000 years ago, the ice moved north enough for people to move in. Actually, it moved north enough for reindeer who were coming out of further south in Europe to move north because it was getting too hot for reindeer. And people followed the reindeer, the Hamburgian people. And amazingly, he said, I said, how many of them were there? He said about 40. 40 people who lived in 2 sites that they know of in Jutland. And they know there were 40, and they know there were no more than that because there are flints in these 2 sites cut by the same hand. A single hand has been identified as the flint maker of those leftover tools. So I like that idea, and I like that reoccupation. But I have to say that for me, the spring mostly comes out of my birds, as Richard was saying. Spring for me, ever since I was a kid, has meant the noticing of new arrivals, of the reoccupation of winter lands. I used to keep a list, I still do really keep a list, which we called the first of year list, where you mark down every time the first chiff-chaff you hear, the first San Martin you see, the first swallow all the way to the first swift, the first nightjar, first turtle dove. Not anymore, perhaps, the turtle dove, but all those ones. That was very important. Interestingly, you don't really do a last of the year list, although this last few years I've been thinking about this, and it's become terribly important to me to see swifts later on, as late as I possibly can. They leave, I still think, roughly about the 6th of August. So any time from the early August onwards, I'm kind of noting my last of. But it's something that naturalists have paid much less attention to when things go. We've always loved and noticed when things come. That's something to think about as well. But and it happens, of course, that we notice the spring much more when we have fewer of them to expect. Keats knew this, and he wanted, knowing that he was soon to die, to see the ordinary flowers of the spring again. There's an absolutely beautiful account of him describing that. Who doesn't? My children are in their 20s, my parents are in their 80s. In this last few years, my family has seen all sorts of openings and closings, and somewhere between them I've felt somewhat stalled, looking back and looking forwards. And somewhere there in the middle, I've also begun to fall apart. Deaf in one ear, the golden teeth, the reading glasses, the drugs you saw on the screen. And so I fall apart on the one hand, and then you try not to on the other, so you take up running, you cut down on the wine, and all those sorts of things. But each spring seems to underline all of this, that we actually only have one spring of our own, although we might live through, perhaps if we're lucky, as many as 80. I think it's also, as a sideline, an interesting, distressing thought to think that apparently it's the case that more people kill themselves in the Northern Hemisphere in the springtime than at any other season. It's been known for quite a long time. Durkheim writes about this, but I think the general feeling as to why that might be is that it's our mood, the singular mood, the human mood, failing to match the world's. So what I've done in this new project has been, it happened within a few months. I realised I needed to do it to start this writing, to start this thinking about the spring. And I saw, in the space of a single spring a couple of years ago, my adult sons break up a street fight in Nice in France with an extraordinary energy and in a manner and a braveness which I never had. And at the same time, my sister and I have had to advance on my parents to take control of their increasingly housebound chaos. I've been spending a lot of time on dumps in the last few years. I've just finished a book about men, almost entirely men, really men, not women. Men watching gulls on rubbish dumps that I'm just grappling with. But I've spent also time trying to throw my father away effectively, trying to throw their house away on their behalf. And my moment which I put against my children assertively being themselves, coming into their own lives and breaking up this fight, is the sight of my father almost falling himself into a dustbin in the local dump in Minehead, trying to retrieve a yogurt pot that I'd thrown in his yogurt pot that he decided was still had some value to him, that he wanted to keep. So somewhere between those two things is me, and feeling then that the spring was something important to pay attention to. My children busy being born, my parents busy dying, and me in the middle between. That's a line, of course, from Bob Dylan. So this feeling then also that we have in our lives, especially if we pay attention to the seasons, of somehow sometimes being in time, in step, and sometimes not, sometimes being out of time, not in that common time. And I wanted to listen to that. This is a line, you'll know it, from a poem by Donald Schwartz, which I think is a sort of spring poem in part. It's a poem that says the spring will come and it will eat you up in a way. It eats up the whole of life. So what I'm writing then is a book about the spring, a single spring, a journey that I genuinely did take north from the equator, north from South Africa actually, all the way up to northern Norway. But all my springs, a lot of thinking about that seasonal energy and motivations, about my time, but also world time, various lifetimes. It comes, Richard mentioned this already, but it comes after two books. The Running Sky, the first book, which was about the air really, and about a kind of a love song to birds and their occupancy of the air. A place that they can make their home that we can't really go to. And the second book, Four Fields, in this glossing, was a book about the earth, a shared place, a common source for everything, and a common destination for us all as well, where we're all inevitably headed. So now and again, then to think about time, what comes between the earth and the air. This book will be told as an almanac of this season. It's made from a journey that included this, the miserable Danes. I love the Danes for their misery, especially in summer. St. John's Day in Jutland again. It rains, it normally does, but they like bonfires. So yeah, after midsummer, sing these sad songs. I couldn't really tell whether they were sad songs. The Danes singing is sad. So that's the end of it really. That's where I end. Is that midsummer, the feeling, the awful havoc of July coming, that awful feeling when all traction is gone in the landscape and the world, the birds have stopped singing. There's a kind of slump, a deadly slump. July is definitely my least favourite month of the year. And at the other end, so that we get to their children in the rain, dancing around the bonfire. The other end, on the first day of spring, I think the book, it really is half and half the year, from midwinter to midsummer, not really the 1st of spring, which is maybe the 21st of March, who knows. Anyway, but this was a piece written on the 21st of March that again came as a kind of totem for my project. And this was written about after a drive on the M5 in Worcestershire. 21st of March, the spring equinox. There are occasions on some motorway drives where you come to and realise that you are alone in a run of the road. Much lies behind you, much ahead, all the cars and lorries of everywhere. But for a while, a mile, you travel on your own, having slipped between everyone else and found some space for a few hundred yards, or 1 minute or so. You're held in time and feel it. Unbidden comes the thought that if you could keep things like this, you would, allowing everything to move as it must, and travelling yourself with it as you ought, but being able to go with the flow, unencumbered and in a stream of something that feels safe, never catching up, never being caught, like birds in a flock. At moments like this, you notice time as otherwise dangerous, as otherwise contagious and remorseless, a wrecking ball, an everlasting bonfire. And you notice this also because you know, even as you become aware of it, that you'll not be able to hold on to the sensation that you are now enjoying of a serene fall, unbruised and elastic. Those gaps ahead of you and behind you are not yours to own or master. Even now you are gaining on the cars in front, while others are hurrying on you from behind. But just for a few moments more, the passage of time and your passage through it floods your mind. So my journey, as I just said, begins in the midwinter and ends in the midsummer, from south to north. This is a map. I have to say it's a map because every birdwatcher grows up with maps like this that mark and track the flow of birds south to north, north to south. Mine is an idiot attempt, scratched with my own intended travels, arrows of desire. Birds couldn't draw it any better, But my scribble also shows what is written into their lives in ways that even as we begin to understand them, we still struggle to fathom. How is it that a swallow with a brain the size of a lentil and wings the length of a pencil can get from the sewage works at Cape Town in December to a barn north of the Arctic Circle in June? Knowing that they do, is it any wonder that given the chance, we would try to follow them? Our species once moved with the sun, as swallows do, and I've tried to do the same. So what I'm talking about, this movement north, we tell is true, I think, by looking at things called isotherms, which is a line on a map that connects points where a temperature is shared. And the 10-degree centigrade isotherm is the pedal for what I'm talking about. At that temperature, vegetation, grass especially, greens up, and at the same temperature, small flying insects begin to appear. The first warmth after the northern winter makes a green room for all, and life begins to move once more. If Europe was flat, the isotherm would advance northwards at that steady walking pace. I could set off at dawn from a place where the thermometer newly read 10 degrees and walk north for 8 hours, and I would carry that temperature with me. And as I did, I would walk in step with a green wave, a wave that breaks northwards for half of the year every year. Of course, it's not quite like that. There are inclines and mountains and warm edges and cold interiors, and the weather can go backwards. And now we've found that we ourselves are capable of hurrying on the season in places and skewing it in others. We've got to be climate changes, and it is not good. There are things to say about this too. Yet no season ever has run straight. The earth doesn't do clockwork, and all this complicates my story, makes it more arresting and I hope more essential. So I got this idea about these isotherms by seeing a map in a book, wonderful book by Ian Newton, fantastic scholarly scientific ornithologist, but also from a poem from a very grumpy, miserable friend of mine, Robin Robertson. It's got some of the dourest Aberdonian tones, but wrote a very beautiful poem about imagining walking north with the season. I'll just leave it up there for a minute. And I've done this myself now, moving from that winter solstice to the summer, the shortest day, to the longest day, from the year's midnight to days of total light in the northern Cape of Norway and Finland in the end of June. And I followed in a single year the journey from Africa to the edge of the Arctic. But as I travelled, I've also drawn on and thought about other people's springs and other springs of my own, in places that loop in time, cut across the continent. As well as travelling in what I call common time, I hope that I've also seen and responded to things that reflect common time. Phenology, the study of seasonal phenomena, is never more of a common concern than in the spring. No other season is so commonly marked, so nationally noticed. The first snowdrop, which I've just seen, cuckoos, catkins, swallows, cherry blossom, lawn cutting, butterflies, leaf bursts, haying, bluebell haze, swift scream. This delicious and ancient story of greening, renewal, the earth's salad days, is flown over or sung through by birds, for me above all, especially migrant birds making the same journey as me. And birds are still the best means I've found for knowing and feeling how life, other than ours, goes on our shared planet. This is my number one favourite bird, the redstart. It has all I need in a bird. Everyone I see has a bloom on it from the times when we're not together. It migrates. It breeds among the freshest, greenest leaves in the sweetest oak valleys of Western Britain. It winters in Africa and across the Sahel, just below the Sahara, in that primal landscape for our species of gently undulating grassland with scattered trees. It's shaped like a small and perfect thrush. Its song is thin but fine and beautifully apt, like the first glances of sun after rain. Both male, this is a male, and female are exquisite to look at. You can see, that's the male, that's the female. Best of all, both have a warm orange-red tail that shimmers continuously. Nobody really knows why. It all happens behind the bird. This is the intriguing thing about it. The moving tail and its redness is commonly the thing that first draws your attention. The blurry red seems to hang in the air in front of you as if it has independent life. It's what Gerald Manley Hopkins would call the redstart's in stress, or a birder would call its jizz, and it's beautiful. Even more magical to me is the fact that what it does, the tail shake, is an action that takes place away behind it, unseen by the bird doing it, but announcing it to all, a signature unseen by the signer. When you see it, you never want to stop looking. It was, I bored my children about it from a very early age. That was my son, he's a lot older than that now, about 25 years ago, drawing redstart for me. It was known to Aristotle for its red tail. He thought robins in Greece, he thought redstarts, which were summer visitors to Greece as they are summer visitors to us, turned into robins in the winter because he couldn't understand where the redstarts went, and they seemed to be replaced by robins, as if the red had shifted from the tail to the rest. So he was onto something. He knew about these movements. It was known to John Clare, a wonderful poem called The Firetowl's Nest. Firetowl is a lovely local name for the bird. It was known to the Anglo-Saxons. Red sturt in Anglo-Saxon I think means tail. It was known to the scientist, to Linnaeus, who named it funiculus, which means a red tail. I love the way he felt inclined to give it that extra shake by repeating the word. So I dragged my children to see them. As I said, young birders. On the left is he's just graduated from SOAS, so that's interest as a secondary bird. And on the right is Dominic at the moment, who's now a medical student in London, but I was watching some spring birds in Segesta in Sicily. I first saw them in the mid-1970s on a trip to mid-Wales, lovely oak tree woodlands, and introduced to a fantastic trinity of birds. I won't go on about the other two so much, but the wood warbler and the pied flycatcher and the redstart are this absolutely sublime trinity of summer visitor birds coming to live and breed in fresh oak woodlands. I last saw a redstart around midsummer last year, 2017, near Tromsø in northern Norway, where I just looked on the weather. Today it was -10 there now, and it's almost all night time. Actually, the sun did come, I think it rose at 11:08 today and set at 12:46. They had an hour and a half of sun today, barely above the horizon. And that's why every redstart that was in Europe this last summer isn't now, and we should think about that. All of those redstarts, I think they're estimated between 6 and 16 million pairs from across Europe and deep into Russia. They're all gone, all now gone. Think about that. And then think that every summer visitor that we're expecting to see this year, all of them are now in Africa. All of them. Every swallow we'll see next year, this coming year, is there now. All the swallows of the north would have crossed the Sahara last autumn, and they'll all be coming back. Some of them will be coming back. They're there now in Zambia and South Africa and Namibia and Mozambique and Madagascar, like fantastic roof tiles. I mean, actually, I just saw them in Cape Town at Christmas time. They look a bit manky, to be honest. We don't see that molt that they have to, they molt in the winter time, in our winter time, in southern Africa. They can live comfortably whilst molting, which they couldn't do here. Anyway, so I want to see as many swallows as I can. I want to see as many firetowls as I can. And I want to keep in time with the season with those birds. I saw those redstarts in the spring of last year, in the early spring, in February, in Chad, south of the Sahara, where the Sahel runs. So I saw wintering birds stepping amongst unlikely animals for me, camels, and looking totally at home. And that's something else that I've got interested in writing this book, is the sort of head space that is required to think about birds being at home when they're not in your home, and in a place that's totally different, and yet they seem, of course, totally at home there. They carry their home with them. So can I carry that thought with me as I follow them north? And I moved from the Sahel north, then across the sand into the desert, and at the same time was also travelling with effectively the historical movement of human people out of Africa from a very beginnings, the exoduses of 2 million years ago, to the desperate, in Chad, visible but invisible attempted exoduses of today. So there's European birds there heading north, and there are people trying to get out of Africa heading north alongside them. There's something to think about there. And at the other end of the flight for the red starts is that sort of place. This is Exmoor in Maytime, lovely hanging green woods. So from the desert to that, and I need to top it up every year. I need to go and see them every year, see my Trinity. In this temperate rainforest, it's fantastic with that submarine light of blue sky through fresh green leaf. And for some, this is the way they finish in the Quantox or in Exmoor. For others, go 2,000 miles further north into the company of reindeer in Tromsø, where I was in northern Norway, north of the Arctic Circle last summer. There's a human nomadism there to think about as well. The reindeer are all owned by the Sami, and the transhumance is very important there. So there's things to say at some point about people moving with the seasons, as the camel herders do in Chad. These reindeer are extraordinary. In June, their antlers are growing an inch a day, which must be like having a tree stuck to your head, growing on your head. But they're very urbanised. That's on a pavement in Tromsø. It was a wild animal, but it's walking downtown Tromsø. The Sami have wonderful a three-word description of the ant will give you any antler shape for Sami, and that's how they own and know their reindeers, by their antler shapes. Both male and female reindeers have antlers. 3 words capture it all. There's some of them. So I stayed in Norway with some friends who are chronobiologists, who work on time and life. Great subjects. One on ptarmigan and one on fish clocks. How do fish know what time of day it is? How do fish know when to go to bed? How they especially know what time of day it is and what time of year it is if they're living as they are, the fish and the ptarmigan of northern Norway, for part of the year in 24 hours of light and part of the year in 24 hours of dark. So there was much talk of light and dark at this top of the world feeling place. And I'd been there in the dark midwinter as well. I'd been to the same fjords and places where the sun, as today, either comes up over the horizon like a kind of accidental winter orange or never appears at all. The day squeezed to a short-lived crack of light at its cold rim, where the slate of the sea meets brindled mountainsides of snow and rock. And the sea was frozen where it touched the land in the winter into a kind of heavy water that looked like old toenails. And in this same fjord as here, I saw killer whales and humpback whales hunting herring, trading greys and blacks between them as they surfaced, with on the shore fantastic white-tailed eagles. And in the winter, again, these white willow grouse looking like snowballs. The ptarmigan, the grouse, go white in this winter time, eking their living from a frozen, impossible place, and a place where there are no small birds in the winter because it's too cold and there's nothing for them to eat, no redstarts. All the redstarts are with the camels in the winter. But then in June, you're getting extraordinary amounts of light and extraordinary amounts of green. Greenery, my title for this book is, I think is a word that Coleridge coined in Kubla Khan, in the Quantox where we just were, or along the coast in the Exmoor hills. I think the first use of the word greenery is in Kubla Khan. Anyway, green is important, of course, for the spring. And one day in Norway, I walked back in time uphill. So I did what I've been trying to defeat by walking north through Europe. I walked against the season, up the hill, back into the season, saw all the seasons in one day. I took a path uphill, the path into snow and ice, and started on thick birch woodland at sea level, where those drawn swords of the unfurled bracken were, and there were leaves on trees at that point that closed the canopy. And I walked up back in time, like a film, running backwards. The leaves pulled back, trees smaller, furled, cased, twigged, in some cases not even budding. and the whole wood getting smaller and lowering into the thin, cold snow. And then towards the top I flushed an amazing bird called a great snipe, like a giant version of our snipe. The first one I'd ever seen, a fantastic northern autumnal bird. It looks like a bunch of leaves, so that was my kind of autumn bit of the day, autumn bit of that walk. And then I also moved out of the summer visitors as I got higher up this hillside. There were willow warblers down below singing. Willow warblers are fantastic, hero birds coming all the way, wintering now in Zambia, destined for northern Norway. And they stopped at a certain point where the trees didn't even have any leaves on them. They stopped. They hadn't gone that far north. But then right at the top, past a kind of crucifix of the mountains, is a wonderful rare bird called a long-tailed skewer that lives up there. Again, doesn't live there in the winter, can't live there in the winter, lives there. And then after that, in that sort of landscape where there's still lots of snow on the ground, heard two absolute heroes for me of the spring. Continental African migrants, a blue throat singing, amazing blue throat, like a poem by D.H. Lawrence, Gentian blue throat, and Wheatia, familiar to us in Britain, this wonderful bird with a white arse, that's where it gets its name from. Hero birds living in these conditions, and as the weather turned bad as I got up there, and the cloud lowered, and the birds were singing, those Wheatias and blue throats were singing. It was still worth their while to sing, still worth their while to be there. And that was extraordinary for me. And I left them all singing, then came back down to earth, back down to the caves, up to the sea level. And next day I went out egging, looking bird boxes with the children of my hosts, and found those same birds filled with, this is a pied flycatcher bird that is part of my trinity, bird that again at the moment is south of the Sahara, all of them in that Sahel thorn scrub, and deeper into the Congo, I think, into rainforest. No one really knows much about where pied flycatchers go in the winter. That's a female there hiding away. That's it's what it's come there to do. Amazing numbers of chicks, all of them which have to make their own way. The adults leave before the chicks even fledge, and they fuck off. The chicks have to find their own way back, amazingly for the first time to the Sahel. Extraordinary. So I come back then from these walks and talk to my friends about time and clocks and biological clocks, and we end in a way in this wonderful daylight, this 24 hours of daylight on sunny days. Even on unsunny days you have amazing pressing, skull lifting off moments of light pressing on you, light driving all of life. And sunlight makes all of us, of course, lighting our stardust from within and without. And whilst we talked, of course, there were redstarts singing and trembling their tails, waiting for an evening that doesn't come as the sun gets lower and lower in the north, the stilling of dusk and the dawn chorus, those two things that are split for us down here by the night. That you don't get that. You have a kind of strange quietening of birdsong in June. The sun is still as bright as it is in this slide, but they do sort of stop for about 20 seconds or a minute and a half or something like that, or at least you feel that. You feel the sun bumping along the bottom, and the birds thinking, Christ, we've got to have a break. But on the hill, really, it just carries on. I mean, the daylight is pouring down, and the birds are having to sing. The crane flies are on the wing, and the moths fly all day long. And the birds sang as I walked towards them, stopped as I got next to them, and then resumed singing as I carried on. One male redstart I counted sang for 22 hours of one day. I worked it out just behind the house where I was staying. 3 cycles of song every minute, 4,000, whilst I sat stunned under the stretched crown of the year. The previous year I was in a second place, and another did the same alongside a blue throat, the same bird as I'd seen on the top of the mountain, through a white night. And this amazing jewellery of mosquitoes you get, this low sun that seems to make these bastard mosquitoes into jewellery. Whilst that not this year but the year before, I was listening to blue throats whilst the European a referendum, the Brexit referendum, was being taken and counted in Britain, and those birds sang on. And in a way, I take it that because there was no night for them there, they never really got to the end of the song, and never really got to the end of that vote, if you like. Yesterday somehow not having ended, whilst today had already long begun. So I'm going to get to the end now, but the denouement for me, and something that will have to be written about in this book, which takes us back to where I came in, was because I came back from this fantastic sun-drenched, red star-drenched trip and had an appointment in the hospital, which I've been waiting for a long time, I had a hospital in Bristol, just around the corner from where I live, and I had got a diagnosis which I've been waiting for, of Parkinson's. And the neurologist was fantastic. He saw me within 30 seconds. He knew what I had. And of course, the thing is with Parkinson's is that you have this tremor. I've got a slight tremor in this hand, and I realised that what I had to do was to bring the Red Star's tremor and my tremor together somehow. That still remains to be seen quite what to do with that, but I've got a new signature for myself here, this tremor. And the Red Star's got this fantastic signature that it shivers away with. It doesn't know what it's doing, but it's doing it all the time. So I come to the end of this thinking about being in time and out of time. This moment in the hospital where I was somehow made to be beside myself in all sorts of ways. Literally, to see this involuntary movement in my hand, and it's something there to become a signature of how time has passed for me. Anyway, another test for Parkinson's is micrographia, the reduction in your handwriting size. And he made me write. You remember there's a scene at the end of 2001 where Hal, computer, is unplugged or loses the will to live, and sings "Mary Had a Little Lamb," and it gets more and more stretched. This is a kind of July moment for me, in a way, the awful stretch of the year where you're not in control anymore, that life is kind of beginning to ebb. Daisy, no, sorry, not Mary Had a Little Lamb, that's what I'm about to talk about. Daisy, give me an answer to. Anyway, my doctor there in the hospital asked me to write down the first line of this song, which to me is a sort of spring song, in order to see whether my handwriting got smaller. I knew that he was going to be looking for smaller handwriting, so I was deliberately writing really big writing. But that, in a way, I sort of like the fact that he somehow a song which seems like a spring song to me, was the thing that announced, if to be grand about it, the end of things for me, one way or the other. So Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb, getting smaller and smaller. The end of spring, a way to talk about being in time and out of time and running out of time. I mean, I don't intend to finish this minute, but it's something about being given a different sort of season that will inevitably have to find its way into this book. My cousin Tessa, who teaches here, was going to come out. Instead of depressing us all with this stuff at the end, I was going to finish with a picture of her brother, my cousin, and me when we were younger. A spring watching in Chew Valley Lake outside of Bristol, connecting again with the first of the year, looking for swifts and swallows and San Martins over the water of the lake. That's Tom. He's now an art historian. I think he's got slightly longer trousers now. The legs are still presumably as fantastic as they are there. Thank you very much. Ask questions or talk, whatever.
Thank you, that was moving, and I can't think of any better combination of still the personal voice and these most important environmental, ecological perspectives. Do we have some questions?
That's it. Right, I'm sorry, so feel free to show me the door.
This one?
How do you feel about writing a season, walking with a season, in the context of the sort of seasonal disordering of climate change and the impact that that will have on the birds that you love so much as well, and many other plants and animals? How can it not be an agonisingly melancholy book?
Well, it will be necessarily in places, although some birds seem to be moving faster than other birds and better able to cope.
Finding their way.
Yeah, and adapting to caterpillar appearances out of time and things like new earlier caterpillars. Some birds, actually red starts are not doing too badly. Pied flycatchers are doing terribly badly. Although they seem to be living in the same woods in Britain and things, and there's all sorts of interesting work on the life of these birds and their wintering grounds as well. The cuckoo is the big story about the cuckoo in Britain, is that we've discovered that, not we, but that it has been discovered that the English cuckoos, which are doing very badly, are wintering in a different place from Scottish cuckoos, which are doing much better. And so actually they're suffering not so much on their breeding grounds here in the UK, but probably on their wintering grounds, to do with habitat change and climate change as well. And so it's a story that links all ends of the birds' journeys together and all of the places in between. I still feel it's a good. I still love them, you know. I mean, I love them as badges of change as well as of badges of continuity. It's a disaster for some species. I've also been the beneficiary of, as a bird watcher, of all sorts of birds breeding in Britain now that weren't breeding in Britain before. All those abandoned fridges you see, those little egrets dotted around the place. When I was first started life as a bird watcher, I went on a train and then a bus and then another bus and my bicycle all the way to Portsmouth to see one that was about 1,000 miles away, and I was incredibly excited. It felt like a kind of wonderful shard of exoticism from the deep south, and now they've kind of become trash birds effectively. So there are the sort of tides of life that we're all running through within our own tidal systems, and which we're affecting and acting upon. So it has to be grim in places, doesn't it? But there's something about the individual assertion of the bird that's arrived from X or Y singing and doing its thing and trying to do its thing, that I find immensely powerful, moving, hope-giving. It seems to be. I'm falling apart. The world's falling apart, and yet these things are doing it. And we have to hope that there will be some. Some of them will make it. There's a whole chapter of this book will be about how migration. Why would you want to migrate over the Sahara? How does that happen? There's a lot of those theories that the Sahara the migration of, I think this is right, may well have begun for some species at a time when the Sahara was a much easier landscape to cross. In the same way that the birds have moved into the northern latitudes as the ice has retreated, like the Hamburgian people. So there was a green Sahara at a time, and that might have been an okay place. And now the birds that are crossing the Sahara are kind of adapted to those that are making it. We don't know what the birds were that might have been here when the Sahara was an easier place to cross. The poor things that can't make it. When you go there, it's extraordinary in places. You see the desert floor is littered with these desiccated corpses of birds that haven't made it across. You can actually, it's paved with bee eaters and swallows and smaller birds. So it's still a major barrier, and that in itself is the sort of racking and wrecking of the world, even within its own terms and conditions, leaving aside what we've done to it, is in itself an engine and motor for migration and for adaptation and so forth. So we have to try to make that tell as well as the grim. We turned up the temperature and therefore they can't do it.
Okay.
Richard Maby's Nature Cure
Yeah.
had a tremendous impact by reminding us about if we lose our connection with nature, as he did in his depression, as he turned to the wall and no longer cared about seasons, and revived with that first recognition of seasons again. But it was criticised for kind of being based on a kind of personal trauma. Your writing seems to be normalising trauma, and I mean that in a sense of embedding these traumas that Kate's been referring to, you know, about climate change, in the normalisation of change, as it were. And I just wondered whether there are some dangers in that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course there are, except that I don't, I mean, I'm not I'm a memoirist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I do, is write about me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I was going to DEFRA or Natural England or what, you know, with my work, then you know, and they're conspicuous by their absence in their approval of my work. So yeah, I mean, I think actually I would still say that the most important thing that I would offer, therefore, would be some evidence of an attempted, albeit subjective, contact with the hard matter of the world. What Thoreau was talking about. You put your finger in it. You need to put your finger in it as best you can. You know, not on a screen, and not maybe making the vatic noise of global outrage or global catastrophe. Where are the great poems of climate change? They haven't yet appeared, and they're not seeming to come. There are fantastic poems about blackbirds in Britain, more poems about blackbirds in Britain than any other bird. I counted them. 70 poems in 1 year were published upon the blackbird. And most of them quite good. Really close looking at how blackbirds live and what the blackbird meant to the poet, or how the blackbird and the poet intersected.
There are no more damning words in literary criticism than quite good.
But you have to read all the books. So I mean, it's important that you know, proper writing, proper due attention is paid to these issues, and the arguments are made and so forth. But it's not what I do. I mean, that's what would be my excuse. But it's a good question. It is something that I agonise about. Mark Cocker, a dear friend of mine, has just delivered a book which attempts to write his own kind of personal history of his own experience of the decline of nature in Britain in his 50, 60 years, mapped onto eco-policy, nature reserve establishment, national park, things like that. He's terrified because he thinks that no one's interested in that. And these publishers not giving much attention to it. You know, when there are other great, you know, there are other good books which are doing, have made efforts in those ways. But I think it's still important to have I hope it's important for some other more inevitably marginal, personal. You know, if no one recalls how it feels, then it doesn't really matter if it goes. If all we know is the statistical, you know, inventory of what's come and gone.
No, I mean, I think that's the fundamental kind of baseline, isn't it? On a walk today, I saw a celandine for the first time under a beach avenue at Babington House, and that was really quite moving. Yeah. If we lose that, then I think we are lost. It's what you're saying, isn't it?
I mean, I love knowing. Knowing of the stuff is very important, and being able to identify it and telling, you know, knowing its name is very important to me. And it's because it's enlarging. If I know there's a rock pipit, a meadow pipit, a tree pipit, and a water pipit, there are 4 times as many little brown jobs as there were if you just knew the generic pipit. So that's fantastic, and I'm not against that. I think that close attention to fact can make poetry as well. You know, and the poetry of fact is something that I'm really interested in. But I don't think the poetry. I think finding subjective voice through global eco crisis is a tough one.
Well, I think these have been sort of part answered already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I think, so like Linda Williams and Notes from the Underground said that sort of like the cultural and spiritual sort of repercussions of the end of hunter-gathering, the end of agrarian society sort of resonated culturally for thousands of years. But for writers and scientists, do you think these are really unprecedented times in terms of what culture and art has to deal with in species extinction and stuff like that? And art, you know, is there a way of responding to that? Really?
Water's hard enough. Yeah, I mean, it's a massive thing.
Because the Industrial Revolution and Romantics, you know, there was huge changes and they, you know,
Yeah,
there was
I mean,
response.
I can only write out of my time, like you can write out of yours and so forth, and we're all stuck. Nature is a very complex word, as Raymond said. And he lost it brilliantly, but and it's probably shifted slightly since then, but not very much. So we're all stuck with received ideas and the larger, you know. I love Coleridge. Coleridge's notes, you know, see me through all sorts of places in terms of ways of looking at the world, and it's that I come back to. Is the celandine under the beech grove. It's the intensity of the specific encounter that exists in personal time and in deep space time, whatever else it is that's going on with the planet. So, and it's important to me that people are knowing what they're looking at and are paying due attention. I don't know. I mean, in the past, people didn't know what they were losing. I mean, there are no poems about the moa's extinction in New Zealand by the Maori, as far as I know. There are no poems about the elephant birds' extinction in Madagascar by the early Malagasy people, although they were the extinctors of those birds. So it's interesting this understanding of things like species lost and loss and so forth, and as it is itself a kind of modern understanding. I mean, we didn't know, the Victorians didn't know what they were doing to the bits of nature they were fucking up. You know, the interesting stuff about the dodo. I mean, they couldn't really believe that they weren't going to keep on coming. I mean, and the dodo walked towards the sailors and they hit them on the head and ate them for their dinner. And no one seemed at that point to be able to think, well, if we keep on hitting them on the head, there won't be any meal. Because the world itself wasn't known at that point to the degree. You know, the assumption was there'd be another Mauritius around the corner that we hadn't yet got to. But all that's very rich and interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think how to write under the knowledge of extinction and the unnamed going extinct as well. I mean it's not a problem for us in Western Europe, but imagine being a poet in Brazil, interested in writing the forest, it's very good, interesting, provocative things to think about.
So, I'm not sure if it's a question or just a comment. I was fascinated by the idea of there being 40 Howard Arians. And I seem to remember reading someone, I can't remember where it was, that when the big stones of Stonehenge were put up, there was about 750,000 people only in the whole of Northern Europe. So then the other figure you gave was for some millions of red stars.
Yeah, 6 million pairs.
But when there's how many billion human beings? I've forgotten the number, it's too many.
7 million.
Then, then we hear about species that are going and we're pleased because there's maybe a few hundred of them or something like that. I just want those figures seem to be extraordinary.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I don't know what to say about it, but they're gobsmacking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but so it's beautiful to be able to contemplate this sort of breathing in and breathing out that happens between the exchange of light and insects that happens across the whole of Europe and Africa, if you like, for the birds. And I love books which do tell me how many red stars there are, because it releases thoughts about then all of those numbers which I can't really contain in my head or work out how many that is. but the sense of absence then becomes stronger, doesn't it? If you think that all those birds, I mean, either we're talking about their extinction or just simply the extraordinary thing that all of those birds are not here now. You know, they've all flown away, and that's worth thinking about. And then the shapes that those birds leave behind. You know, and other birds duly occupy them. You know, the birds, I was going to read about some wintering birds coming, you know, from further north to fill the spaces. So I find that trying to think about ways to write about the epic but ordinary exchange of life, as it happens in my case of birds, you know, between those continents. And I fudged up when I was talking just now about this movement of people, but there is something, it does reflect back onto how we understand what migration might mean for us all as our species as well, and why we're troubled by it, and why we so there's all sorts of things to.
The other epic bird book I read recently is Nicholson's book, Adam Nicholson's
Yeah,
book.
fantastic.
They're extraordinary, those seabirds.
Yeah, working and now knowing what they're doing over the horizon, seeing by smell and things like that. Yeah, fantastic book. Yeah.
You said you found it difficult to accept that the birds you know in your own space from your childhood and here are at home in other parts of the world, in other landscapes, and you showed us that picture of camels at that time. And that's a very intriguing thought, which I think opens up, I suppose, questions about the fear of otherness and the fear of something being taken away, I suppose. And at the same time, the beginnings of how one could legitimately, you know, in all post-colonial conscience, begin to regard the whole world as a kind of home and a kind of place where oneself can identify.
That's a very good. I mean, that's a good point, and I think that's one thing that birds can teach you. Well, one thing I love about birds is they don't have to carry bags. They don't need to, and look at me. I'm weighed down with bags all the bloody time. One bag, never go out of the house without a bag. And then birds do everything. I mean, even the nest is so beautifully temporary, if required. So they make their footstep their footprint is so light. They're citizens of the world in that way. And I've troubled, as a footnote to what and your point is a super point, but one of the things that I gave up being a hardcore twitcher as a teenager over was this sense of birds being in the wrong place. The excitement of rare birds in Britain is that they've blown from America or from Siberia or have come here as vagrants or accidentals. It's known that most of those birds are probably not going to get home again, insofar as they have a home. It's known that most of them, you know, birds, especially first-year birds that have just hatched out of the nest in Central Asia and should fly to Thailand for wintering, and actually they fly in the compass opposite, so they end up in the west coast of Ireland or in Shetland. And then they probably fly further on out into the North Atlantic where there's nowhere for them to perch, and that's the end of them. And that really troubled me as a child, as a young man. And I love seeing those birds because they were fantastic waifs, you know, these wonderful rarities from the other side of the world. But knowing that they weren't going to be kind of at home here was something that I found problematic. And it made all of the chasing a subspecies of coffin ambulance chasing, whatever you call it. But no, there is possibility in those movements as a you know, it can be politically liberating.
I was reminded of a book which has, for a novel, quite a lot of statistics in it, Jonathan Franzen's Freedom. And he says sort of stop climate change, that's not the real issue, it's cats. And he has, his character of course suffers because of this particular view. But I'd just really be interested to know what you think about cats.
I'm allergic to cat fur. And my parents refused to believe that. So they had 5 cats at one point, and they sort of said, "Why are you so wheezy?" You know? I said, "It's the cat." They wouldn't. They didn't. Eventually, the cats have all died now. The last time I saw the cat had gone. He was called Baby, significantly. You know, my parents' true offspring cat. My dad, who was not, is a rather shrunken man himself these days, was carrying the cat like a kind of gold miner with this bald cat from one room to another. He's. They kill millions of birds. It's true. They do kill millions of birds, but they're kind of, they're sort of us. I mean, I'm big on this thing. You know, the book I've just written is about gulls. You know, which no one likes apart from these nutty guys who love them. You know, and that's interesting to me. Why is it that these things that come close to us, that are successful alongside us, are somehow something that provoke us and prompt our derision? You know, is it some ancient competitiveness, or is it something to do with a kind of jealousy of their success? You know, and so the whole domesticated animal thing. I mean, I'm not a pet keeper myself, but I'm not a kind of missionary against the keeping of cats. Or I mean, they do kill. I don't know what is it. They kill. I just read Stephen Moss's book about the robin. I think they killed 1.8 million robins in Britain a year or something. I mean, but then, you know, how many badgers do you see when you drive down the roads? I mean, we've got other ways of sorting these things out, of messing the world up. You know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And I love the kind of untamed cat thing. I much prefer cats to dogs, but then who thought I would have been talking about cats and dogs?
Thank you very much, Jim, for this lovely talk. I have two lovely cats who I adore, and I won't go on to that one. I'd like to ask you about, because I was very struck by this notion of the redstart tail and your tremor. And I've been listening to what people have been saying, and I take Terry's point about the trauma, but I do think this is a way for you to put your finger in the hole, as it were, you know, to sort of make something concrete about the connection between different kinds of trauma. And I'm wondering how you're going to work on that. For me, it seems very important. I was really struck by it. And I'm interested in how you feel about this. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But
well, the truth is I don't really know yet, because I haven't actually written it. I mean, I've written it down, but I haven't written it properly. And I won't really know until I do that. But if this project is about this sort of seeking to feel in time, to be in step with a season and the sort of that spread of life as it comes into Europe through the season, then superficially the kind of tremor is a very small, can only be a very small part of that. But it seems to me it's about being, for me it will have to be about this permanent thing about never really being in step, or in you know, when is my time? When am I in joining the common time? When do we feel we're in step with the working of the world, or even our human friends and families and so forth? So it's the whole spring thinking, this feeling of the shape of the season, and our stepping up into it, and our desire to be open to it and to somehow move with it as we live our lives, not only within that single year, but as, you know, we all have springs in our lives when we do things that which we didn't do beforehand and which we can't do afterwards, perhaps. So it will have to come from some adjacency to those thoughts, the bigger feelings of our own chronobiology, you know, and then the feeling that I mean, I'm new to this, but discovering that you have a condition that you're never not going to have. something that will actually be progressive, and who knows where we'll end up. But then not wanting to be identified only with as a patient or as a sick person, and wanting to find some way to take what it was doing to me, or what it is going to be doing to me, and to turn it a little bit into an observation about how I feel we all are, in some ways, about how we all seek to move through the world with the lightest of steps, to move in time, not to be unbalanced, not to tremble when we don't want to. I mean, the matching of the red star's tremble and my tremble is, I can't make that work in my head at the moment. I see it as a sign of myself, but it doesn't do the same delicious thing that the red star's tremble does.
It obviously isn't a literal connection, but I just am struck by this notion of tremor. Spring being a very tremulous season.
You know, the fuzz on the khaki.
And
exactly.
I just find it's such a resonant thing. I would be really interested, obviously we can't say about that, but I find it fascinating as a way of working.
No, I get to be writing about various musics. I've become obsessed with droney music, with music that goes on underneath other music. So in northern Norway you have the Hardanger, in Norway you have the Hardanger fiddle, which has got this fantastic resonating under strings, and I love the kora in sub-Saharan Africa, in Mali, in West Africa, which has this ability to, the masters of the kora have this ability to keep a kind of drone pedal, I don't know music at all, but drone note going underneath their playing. And in a way that Parkinson's tremor is a drone for me, always becoming that in my mind, is the kind of sustaining note that burbles on beneath, in the way that it works for those musics. I mean, I'm not making sense, I can tell, I know, but I'm just thinking my way into your question.
No, you are making sense. I think that works very well, and that gives it that edge of positivity that I felt in what you were saying.
Yeah.
Is something on the other side of trauma.
Yeah, no, I hope so. They're all good questions, that's a good question too.
And in a way, your book actually is about not wanting to let go of the season, make it last longer, hold it.
Yeah,
which is what a tremor or drone does, isn't it?
It's a dying fall.
Forever. Not let it pass, try and keep up with it.
That's right.
Yes.
Just one in that connection. Have you read Jay Griffith's book on bipolar?
Yeah, it's on my desk.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's not the same as part, but it's still about a writer and response.
Yeah, yes, and finding ways to use that as well.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary account. And her claiming it, I mean, that's not the word she wants to, I'm trying to remember what she uses a different older-fashioned word to describe it. She doesn't like bipolar, she actually prefers manic depression. But I don't remember, but there's another word she uses, which is a sort of sense of using it as her as a writer. I was very moved by it.
Do we have more questions? Yes?
This is a kind of left field question. I know you were a radio producer.
Yeah.
So does that feed into your writing at all?
Yeah, well the BBC is very, I sort of keep it separate in a way. I mean, it does feed into my writing insofar as it's taken me to places which I then ended up meeting people and landscapes and people that I've ended up writing about. The BBC is although there's a great tradition in the BBC in the olden days of writer-producers, William McNeice, Dylan Thomas and so forth. In the current world, the idea of a producer actually having a voice of their own is sort of anathema to the BBC. Horatio Clare, who you might know of, is a lovely writer who was a radio producer like me, had to leave the BBC in order really to get back onto the BBC as a writer. So I don't. My writing doesn't come on the BBC. Well, it's tiny bits, maybe a little bit of that, but most importantly, for me, it's the wonderful opportunities to be with all sorts of different people and to make programs about things that I'm interested in. That I mean, it's the best way of staying interested in the world was joining the BBC and being able to make radio programs. And I've been very lucky that I've been able to make pretty much programs that I wanted to make rather than programs that other people told me I had to make.
So do you still make radio programs?
I do, yeah, about 30 a year. Although I was poorly last year, but someone else helped me out. But I'm back. In fact, today I've been working on a program with Lavinia Greenlaw about some poems she wrote about her father losing his mind. I had another program with Richard Maybe about the wonderful Amazonian English botanist, the first woman to paint a moonflower, a flower in the Amazon, and a radio play about imagining that when all the phone boxes of Britain were taken out of circulation, the old call boxes, which is happening now, 7,000 in London this year or something, that all the tracked phone calls are suddenly allowed to speak. A mixture of stuff, but it's good, a good place to work, although it's hellish at times.
So this is probably a bit of a mean BBC question, but so the Blue Planet 2 definitely seems to have made some penetration about consciousness of plastic in the sea, but do you think the Natural History Unit made enough effort about environmental crisis?
Not in the past, definitely not.
No.
It's been a real, a really naughty, bad thing.
Well, was that a debate within the BBC as a natural?
Sorry?
Was it a debate within the BBC and the Natural History?
Because the trouble is most people who make natural history programs are young jockey adventurers who love skydiving and flying on the back of a camel or whatever, young men in a hurry, as my wife would say. And so the agenda has always been about capturing the shot. And the narrative, I mean, the wonderful thing about the underwater program, the Blue Planet, is that the narratives that were available to the construction of the filmmaking were so different from the terrestrial narratives, which basically are, animal hunts other animal and kills or doesn't kill it, which we've seen over and over again, which is such a shorthand for a kind of porn. The wonderful thing about those sea slugs and things was, you didn't know the stages of anything, you didn't know where it was going to go, what they were going to look like in a minute's time and things, and so that really shook them up, I think. And so not only was the environmental agenda much more richly told in that series, I think, than previously. Actually, I thought in some ways they'd been led to be able to tell those environmental stories by the fact that the animals themselves weren't the charismatic staples of natural history. There wasn't the bloody Serengeti added to it. I mean, I love the Serengeti, it's a wonderful place, but we know the story. I mean, there used to be, I even remember as a kid, there would always be the last minute, unless we do something now, this world is not going to survive. And this remained like that pretty much ever since. We'll see what happens now. I mean, the international sales and all that, I mean, it's a huge business. The Natural History Unit is full of people who make floor shows for ocean cruises, projecting beautiful images of tropical rainforests in Costa Rica so that people can dance while steaming to Costa Rica with the captain's table. I mean, it's the worst sort of pornography.
Yes.
What you say about the Blue Planet and those creatures really chimes with, I suppose, the turn towards everything oceanic and marine in eco-criticism, and especially queer eco-criticism, actually, in recent years. And you've really articulated why, I suppose, in a fundamental way. I mean, of course, it's partly to do with alternative narratives of evolution and the recovery of our old aquatic ancestors. But also, yes, I think it is that sense of fluidity of organic form.
It's amazing, isn't it? I'm so excited to see those things. Just because you don't know what's going on. I mean, I'm terrified of the sea. I don't want to go into it. And that was abundant evidence why you should never go into it. But yeah, really interesting. I mean, it really did shake up their storytelling.
I mean, the question is, can those insights now be brought back to the other places, which I suppose is a bit what you might be doing in your own work.
Well, yeah, but not. I mean, I did make a film about trying to record the wind That was
Wonderful.
wonderful. Which was a sort of anti-nature film. A nice filmmaker made for BBC 4 about trying to record the sound of the wind before it hit the English coast or hit the bumped into anybody. But trying to get, I mean, you know, that even a David Attenborough script is about, I don't know, 600 words or something for an hour's program. It's minuscule in the actual amount of, so the camera is king and the visuals are king. And that, I mean, even the Blue Planet, I mean, I could, if I would, I'd be a rich man if I could take pennies from everybody who complained about the music. I mean, people are still troubled by the symphonic arrangements that the natural world had put to. And they would, especially, that was particularly strong with that one, I thought.
One or two more, Mike has one.
Yeah, I can sort of make a coherent question, but just just think about the sort of connection between. Well, I kind of really enjoyed the sort of not terribly subdued melancholy almost of your talk, and just thinking about that, the connection between that and the focus on the different kind of temporalities that you're looking at with this, and you know how we obviously as part of the human condition we're sort of a long-lived creature, and you know it comes with some pluses, but it also means that we can know loss, and in this context, you know, have a concept of many seasons and how they've changed, and you know things that are perhaps no longer happening and whatever, and yet when you're there, sort of immersing yourself fully in one season, then that's as of course the birds are, or we kind of might imagine them to be. You know, they're there. They've not got that sort of spring's not like last spring, is it? You know, that's not, or at least we sort of assume that's kind of not going on at all. You know, and
no, it's this permanent present tense, isn't it?
Yeah, and yet we sort of like there's sort of paradox there as well, isn't there? Because I mean, they're the dinosaurs. They've been there.
Yeah.
They've been doing this much longer than we've been around. You know?
Yeah. No, we're just the little scribes on the edge. Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's why it's interesting to look at it, isn't it? It's trying to think about it a bit. And it seems, I mean, so much of our lives are so. I mean, it always surprises me how much people are switched on to seasonal change, even though we spend so much of our lives kind of avoiding it, you know, or we now live in environments where it doesn't really matter what season it is, or you know, the raincoats are so much better than they used to be, and so forth. But we still feel it somewhere. Yeah, that's good, isn't it? And I want to get everybody doing that. And I love the very banal things like all those marvellous gardeners' diaries. That, you know, the first time they cut the lawn that people have recorded that have now become the means by which we know the incremental creep of of temperature rise and so forth. So it's great that we still notice it. I don't buy, and now put in my standard anti-Robert Macfarlane moment, I don't buy the kind of awful death of engagement with the language of nature, or the or the seasons, or the weather, or anything like that. Actually, I think we might not use. I don't need to know the old English word 10 words for the different sorts of rain, because there's as many good words for different sorts of rain now, and so forth. So I feel we are still, despite ourselves, as alive to it as we ever have been. Even if we're not, if we can tell, I can look up the weather in Tromsø, and I haven't, and so forth. We're newcomers, aren't we? Maybe that's why we're so interested in it. I've also been looking at I was looking at some cave paintings, rock shelter paintings in South Africa, and it's so wonderful that you can identify the species that were painted by these bushmen 10,000 years ago, and the same in caves in Spain and things. They were incredibly acute observers of what they saw, even though we don't know what the paintings were for necessarily. Is it a shopping list or a record of what they'd seen, or a shamanic introduction text or anything. I love the fact that you can place the animals exactly. We know, because those paintings were so accurate, we know that animals were living there in that time. Sorry, that's not really an answer to your question.
Well, I think probably with... Oh, well, one more, go on.
Just a short comment, really. I was really struck by the way that you disclosed how pondering migratory birds reveals how we're kind of woven into kind of translocal multi-species collectives of different kinds, you know. But also very much prompted to think, as an Australian, about the part of the trauma of the kind of colonial experience for Europeans in Australia was their inability to read the seasons. And just, you know, having lived through a couple of springs in England now, I'm beginning to understand how weird that must have been. To be completely, you know, at sea and grasping desperately, trying to say, oh, this is like it's the opposite time of the year, but we'll call this spring. But you know, it doesn't quite work.
Yeah. Although apparently suicide rates are in South Africa to match, you know, northern hemisphere rates linked, but with the reverse, I mean, the seasons being the seasons and so on. No, that's really interesting. And I mean, anyone who spent any time from either the northern latitudes or the southern latitudes in the tropics will feel this which I was trying to say there.
Yes.
You know, it's a really bizarre, alienating experience in that day length equality and temperature equality and the awful sweat plus the insects.
Right, one more.
How, because of David Attenborough's programs, how will we ever stop being entertained by nature and actually start to because those strange things you're talking about just then wouldn't make good television because they would challenge. People don't want to be challenged, they want to be entertained.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Radio is the answer.
Radio.
Well, the pictures are better. There's more words. But yeah, no. Well, they are all lovely, you know, I mean, people now do love those tropical things, you know. Tropical life is extraordinary, and so forth. And it's where we all came from, you know. Speciation is absolutely there. I mean, my wife works on birds that have been the same for is it 30 million years? 30 million years, I think. The same basic species. You know, whereas everything that we've got, I mean, all of our birds in Britain now can't really be older than 10 or 11,000 years since the last ice. So there's all sorts of things to think about and to learn about from that. So, but yeah, well, I mean, they are entertaining as well. I love the cat videos like everybody else. There's a wonderful one of, do you know that? There's an artist called Andy Holden whose father's a birdwatcher. His father was a professional ornithologist, worked for the RSPB, and he's an artist. And he's just did an exhibition about eggs and nests in London. A wonderful show, catalogue's very worth looking at. He makes little films, including a film of otters playing the piano. A little film of otters playing the piano. It's entertaining. I'm not trying to be flippant. I mean, I think we you know, it goes back to the cats. You know, we've engaged with, you know, we've domesticated half of the world, and the tanglement is you know, speaks of who we are and what we've done. I mean, it would be interesting if the Natural History Unit and the BBC Television started making programs about. I don't know why they haven't done this about farm animals or about domestic animals, you know, because I mean, they did do the private life of a cat or something, didn't they? But that, you know, why not? Because the reason why is because it comes too close to home.
The politics of that would be quite dangerous.
Yeah.
But the book, The Secret Life of Cows, has been reissued after about 15 years. It went right to the top of the bestsellers.
Yeah, because Alan Bennett loves it. Yeah. No, it's a nice book.
Come on, Sean.
Well, you sort of took us to South Africa, Southern Africa just a minute ago, and the way that this conversation has gone makes me think of, I work in Namibia, with people there, and I think this, people have been entertained by other species forever. So I'm thinking, for example, of the people that I work with who, in their songs and their dances, their healing practices, they mimic other animals with and they laugh, you know, they are very amused by the antics of other animals and what we can learn about human society through the antics of other animals, but the ability to mimic other kinds of beings accurately through you know, just copying basically, and enacting is certainly very cute there. So I think people have been entertained by animals forever. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that I was thinking about you talking about the tremor, because my father also had Parkinson's. Is that in that context, actually shaking, I know it's not involuntary shaking, but shaking and becoming resonant with, I don't really know how to describe it other than to say the energy that's around us all the time, is actually how people become healers in those contexts. So there is a very other experience of the power and of shaking, about becoming resonant, and there's lots.
No, that's very interesting. I think that's what I was trying to get towards, but this new interest I got in this drone, in the drone noise. This sort of breathing. And I love circular breathing jazz musicians who can never stop playing and play over their breath for the same reason. And thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.
And there is more wine and